All right. Hey guys. So coming at you from my car in the parking lot of the place my mom is having eye surgery right now. So yay technology. But here we go. I am in the middle of Colorado Springs and coming at you. So here we go. This is part two, unit six. Gonna make this as short and sweet as possible. So you will need to pause and go through and catch notes that I don't maybe necessarily say that you see on the screen. All right, standard 6.6 density and land use. Basically, going to look at low, medium, and high density housing characteristics. Remember, this a lot of this correlation can come back to lower density means higher income. Higher density usually reflects lower income, but as we see people moving into the cities, that pattern is actually shifting a little bit. Okay, population density. So you can just see here how many people there are in a given area based on kilometers, a square kilometer. And you can see, I mean, this is uh, pretty wild that here. So we think things in America are crowded. We'll check out Dhaka, check out Mumbai. So again, you can see here. Okay, so again, oh God, last thing we need, no, is for me to look bigger on this screen. But we're not trying that, especially not today. I barely got my eyebrows on today. Okay. So guys, remember bid rent theory. We're seeing this. The higher or the closer the land is to the central business district, the higher the land cost. And then we also add in what is that zoning? And that's something we've been talking about unit six. So is it zoned for commercial, industry, residential, etc. Okay. Here we go with again looking at this concentric zone model and understanding that from that central business district, the further away the land is, how the value of the land changes and how the use of that land changes. Zone of transition, working class, we keep the people who work in the industry close to their jobs. Residential zone, and then commuter zone, people who can afford to live far away and then drive in. Okay. High density areas. So, what does that mean for residential areas in high density areas? So, again, the closer to the CBD, the buildings have to start going up because they can't go out. Um, and obviously, that's going to affect the density. You can put a lot more people in a tall building than in a short building. But for example, like here in Paris, they actually put height restrictions on the buildings pretty early on. You can see here, these are probably what, 3 or 4 stories, maybe 5 or 6 stories here. And that was to preserve the scenery. New York City clearly did not have that in place. And so now their buildings are incredibly tall, and you get those urban canyons, which we've talked a little bit about, that idea that there are literally places where the sun can't shine on the streets of New York anymore because the buildings are so tightly packed and they're so tall. Okay, check this one out. This is, sorry, I'm like literally in the driver's seat of my car. Both images of Chicago, but you guys can see here on the right side over here, and this is like the old town you guys can see. And you can see it's mixed in. There's houses mixed in with some factory. You guys see a little bit of like smoke here. And then obviously like high residential. And then you have like kind of the newer, um, bougier part. Okay. When moving out of the CBD, what changes do we see? So the further away we get from the CBD, we start to see a lower or medium density areas. So again, we start maybe getting into like these are brownstones in New York City, or you even get into single family housing, and you can see like out here, you can see the skyline here way in the background, and then you can see what happens to the housing levels there. All right. And again, what patterns of development do we start to see in these areas? So this is Suburban 101. Remember the little video clip we watched, the Hoop Dreams, the boys who were shuttled, they were commuting from like inner city Chicago or to the bougie like suburbs to go play basketball. And you saw the like type of housing change that way. All right, so low density, again, when we get out into like rural areas, we start to see like these villages, dispersed villages instead of clustered all around something. People like to live out here for more access to land and whatnot. Okay, accesses to services. So obviously, think about this: little downtown hubs, like Fountain, for example, like little old town Fountain, like where the city hall is, used to be kind of a hub of Fountain, and then obviously the Mesa, where Safeway is, like up by kind of where my house is, has just exploded, and that's become like the new focus, the central focus for downtown Fountain. And then we know if you live in Fountain, you have to go to Colorado Springs to get services. Perfect example. I live in Fountain. My mom lives in Fountain with me, but we had to come up to pretty much central Colorado Springs for her eye surgery because, surprise, there's not an eye surgeon in Fountain. So there we go. Okay. Think about this, especially with COVID, when people just shifted to like ordering online. We've started to see malls just they don't exist, brick and mortar, so like an actual physical store. That's kind of gone away in favor of online ordering. But I don't know. You guys have brought the 90s back, and malls were real big in the 90s. So I fully anticipate you guys are going to revive malls, which I think would be cool. Not going to lie. Because online is great, but it's nice to shop in person. Okay, here's a practice question for you. So again, I'm just going to have you guys pause and go through this one on your own. Okay. And then here's your takeaway, um, patterns of residential land use. The idea of looking at patterns and the location of that central business district. So, again, the closer to the CBD, higher density, then you get into like medium density suburbs, and then you get into like low density rural area. Okay. 6.7 infrastructure. The quality and location of a city's infrastructure directly affects its spatial patterns of economic and social development. Okay. So, what is infrastructure? Communication systems, roadways, highways, public transport, airports, ports for like boats, railways, education systems, hospitals, water and sewage systems, electric grids. Literally, right before I started filming this, I saw an article. Elizabeth Warren was talking about how childcare is part of infrastructure. And if childcare is not easily accessible and affordable for people, that messes up everything. If your mom or dad can't get your kid a childcare, then they can't do their job, and then therefore they're out money. Then creates like a big cycle. And so, again, infrastructure is all the things we generate from like tax revenue is usually how these things are paid for, and the things that keep all of us going and that everybody accesses at some point. Okay, that's why like when I travel to New York City to visit friends and family, I can get on their subway. I don't pay the taxes of New York City, but there's a publicly accessible service for me that I can still use. All right, so local politics, society, and environment will all impact infrastructure. Again, it in our country, the infrastructure is aging. Like the modern interstate system was built in the 1950s. We see this with I-25. I-25 is such a hot mess right now. The GAP project, like gross. The GAP project has been going on for years, it feels like, and it's never getting done. So the traffic between like Colorado Springs and Denver has just become ridiculous because the highway has not kept up with the population growth we've had here. Taxes are obviously generated to build and maintain the infrastructure. And so this is kind of an ongoing thing. I have a cousin right now who does urban design. That's her job. Like so cool. And this is something she's actively working on is getting better public transportation in Denver and then into the outlying areas. Excuse me as I drink my gas station coffee. It's a whole thing today, guys. Mm, very good. Thanks, Come and Go, for your $1.50 coffee. Okay, traffic and congestion in Mexico City. The Mexico City is a colonial city, so remember the colonial model. There is definitely like a cathedral core, the old colonial core, and cars weren't readily available in Mexico City until like the 1950s and 60s. But guess what? The roadways were built before that, and so they're not literally wide enough to accommodate the traffic needs today. Many European cities, the ancient roadways, weird when they were built in 1000 BC. That's not a word. 1000 BC. How about 1000 AD? That's more realistic. When they were built in 1000 AD, they were built to accommodate a horse and a carriage, and then people. Now, obviously, to accommodate motor vehicles is a whole new thing. So you see major traffic congestion in like colonial areas. America, we love automobiles. And with the exception of the East Coast, which can be a little wild still because there's still some old school structure, you go to the Midwest and out West, and you basically have to have a car in these parts of America. And everything was built for vehicles. Mm, love this. So in Mexico City, they've created these aerial trams. Basically, people just get on an aerial tram who maybe live on the outskirts or they live in the zone of disamenities, and they can literally take a tram in, bypassing the traffic on the road. Kind of cool, right? And economical and environmentally better. Those are good things. All right. Quality and access to transportation and connectivity makes a difference. Again, my best friend lives in New York, and she lived in New York City and moved 30 minutes away to a beautiful little hamlet on the Hudson River. I mean, it's like a postcard. It's beautiful. And it's literally a 30-minute train ride from the train station right by her house. And she has a beautiful house with a big, beautiful yard. And she hops on that train, and in 30 minutes, she's in Grand Central Station, which is like smack dab middle of Manhattan. Like, so cool. That's that accessibility that's so important. Unfortunately, there is still a major disconnect with people of lower income, a lower socioeconomic status, and access to this public transportation that could make a huge difference for them. Okay, healthcare services, culture and entertainment options, again, transportation connections, internet availability, all of those are part of an infrastructure. And if that is not developed or reliable, you're going to not, you won't attract people that want to come and bring maybe their skill set or their income or whatever it is to that area. So that's why, again, it's really important that this infrastructure is in place. I know when President Trump was running for president, one of the things he talked about was he really wanted to get American infrastructure like back on track. And he talked about the airports in America. And I think I've mentioned this in class before. Remember when we watched the show? Oh my gosh, the name of it just blanked me. But when they were in Singapore and they went to the airport in Singapore, they talked about the airport itself was a tourist attraction. Well, American airports are like depressing. They're really bad. DIA is okay, but it's already pretty aging. I remember when DIA was brand new, I flew out of it like within its first couple months of operation, and it was like, oh, shiny. It's kind of run down now. But I mean, I've also, if you've ever flown into like JFK Airport in New York City, it's dark. There's no windows. Like, it's pretty bad. So I digress about the need for airports to get better. Okay, practice question for you. So you'll definitely want to pause here and kind of read through this question and look at what this is talking about. Oh, I should say, this is talking about Tyson's Corner, which is one of the things in your workbook that you guys read about. Okay. All right. What's the takeaway? Location and quality of cities' infrastructure affects the spatial patterns and economic and social development. And countries, regions of a country, and cities that lack access to decent infrastructure can lag in terms of economic and social development. I mean, that's just hands down. Side note, real quick, it's really interesting with the vaccine rollout for COVID right now. One of the early criticisms of the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines is the temperature at which they had to be stored was it had to be like sub-freezing, hardcore, like medical grade refrigerators. And so that was obviously very frustrating for like rural communities that their little like, urgent care clinic they don't have that kind of technology with those like deep freeze refrigerators. One of the reasons why the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, which has been put on hold right now, that's a whole another discussion for another day. But why it was appealing, not only because it's the one and done shot, right? So if you're a person who's homeless, you can get one shot and then you don't have to get like tracked down again to make sure you get your second dose within the right amount of time. The other reason that the Johnson and Johnson was appealing is it does not need to be stored that cold. In fact, I think it can be stored like in the fridge you have in your kitchen. So if I'm a little rural clinic, my infrastructure might not be like hospital level technology to store my stuff. But if I have a Whirlpool fridge, I can store it and give the shots out, or they could even just bring it in on like a mobile clinic. But again, this is all tied to infrastructure. What is available? Okay, 6.8, sustainability. We love this. So remember, sustainability is basically, can we do things now that are going to give us what we need that are going to also not harm future use of this? So like the use of fossil fuels right now is not sustainable. Sure, we're getting what we need, but 100 years from now, is that going to even be an option for people? So the standard here is to identify different urban design initiatives and practices. Like I said, my cousin is studying urban design, and this is like her specialty. making green spaces, walkable cities, increased public transportation, smart growth, new urbanism, slow growth cities. So controlling the like sprawl, urban sprawl, y'all. Like we want to control that. So I don't know. This is one of those things that like maybe in my next lifetime I'll do because I just am fascinated with this. And I really think for you guys that are, maybe toying with career options, this could just be a really fascinating field. And then you can thank your freshman AP Human Geography teacher for just kidding. I'm done. Okay. So again, the idea here that we need to be thoughtful with the cities that we're building and making sure that again they're sustainable for the future. All right. What are we going to talk about here? Long-term viability of cities in terms of environment, resources, population pressures, and then what are some of the potential solutions? So building green belts, smart growth, so making sure we're not just obliterating any open farmland, and then this idea of new urbanism, reducing urban sprawl, so how big and like fat and wide cities are, and increasing affordable housing. That's a huge issue. And we are feeling that in Colorado. Fountain, Colorado. I still, it blows my mind that houses are $400,000 in Fountain. Um, when I moved to Fountain in 2003, which is true, my house was $130,000, and we were like, "Oh, it's so expensive." I mean, it's crazy now. Okay, so a green belt, that is a purposeful space in a city that cannot be developed. So that could be a park, or it could just be literally just like an open area that they have preserved, especially in a highly developed area. So like here's in Shanghai, China, making sure that there is green space around that. Okay. Um, Love this. This is Chicago, Illinois. All the green on this map are going to be open park systems, and they're again have been purposely integrated into the urban setting here. Okay. Probably the best example of like a city with a park is New York City. I mean, right? When they were building New York City in the 1800s, they actually had a psychiatrist come in, and he told the urban planners, he said, listen, if you don't preserve some green space, the psychological issues are going to be paramount. People need nature. They cannot just be in a concrete jungle. That's what, people call New York City. So he was like, you've got to put some green space in here. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel a lot better when I'm just, even like at work, at school, I'll just go out for like a little quick loop around the building, and I feel so much better just being in that open area. Hey, obviously the other benefit to having these open spaces, um, plants help with oxygen and keeping the air clean. They bring in, natural environmental benefits. And again, for like the emotional stimulus for people, this is a good deal. Okay. All right, mass transportation. Got to have a good public transportation. I am going to dog on Colorado Springs for a minute. Our mass transportation is a joke. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to ride like the bus system we have here. It takes 2 hours to go somewhere that it should have taken 20 minutes, 30 minutes to go. Again, our city for some reason just hasn't kept up with this. Denver has an improved light rail system. I don't know if you guys have ever ridden light rail. When my family goes to like Denver Bronco games, for example, we'll park at the light rail station the furthest south in Denver. I think it's the county line station. It's like right outside of Castle Rock. We'll park our car there, hop on that light rail, and it takes us straight, with the exception of a few things, pretty much right where we need to go for those Broncos games, or even like going downtown Denver. Okay. So again, just seeing mass transportation, how that can look. All right. Sustainability, obviously trying to integrate green technology into our cities. So increased use of solar panels. Obviously in a city, that is going to be your preferred option because they're not noisy. They can be pretty much, kind of blend in with the environment. You wouldn't want like a wind turbine in the middle of your city because it's tall, people would see it, and they're noisy. So that's kind of why they put them out kind of further away. All right, mixed use development. Development of mixed use homes with different zoning policies. So back in the day when they were designing cities, think about the urban game we did. You guys became very strategic about, well, we're going to put all the like tenement housing over here, and we're going to put all the rich people housing over here. Now the new push is what we call mixed use. So they're trying to blend, okay, well, we'll put some high, medium, and low density housing within the same area. We're going to also mix in some commercial sites, which is like, where people can go and like pay for services. And then industrial zones, obviously industrial, you still want to keep a little bit out of the fringe just because people don't want to live next to a factory or have to hear it or smell it or anything like that. We're seeing, again, mixed use development coming to Fountain, especially with where they're going to build the new Dutch Brothers Quick Quack car wash. And I think they're building like another, I think a Big O Tire. It's all right across from Mesa Ridge High School. And so for a long time, that land was just designated as like, I think they were going to try to make it homes. Like they wanted houses, more around the schools. But now they're bringing in mixed use development, which is good and bad. I have friends that work at Mesa Ridge High School, and they said the concern is, man, we're going to have this like Maverick gas station right across the street from the high school. Is that going to attract kids to go down there and like skip school and go get their stuff? When the Dollar General was built by the high school, our high school, that was also another concern. But again, we're starting to see this mixed use development. This allows people of all different income levels to access a lot of services within their city, and not be like segregated away from it. Okay, practice question. You'll want to pause here. We're almost done, guys. I know I always say that, but I promise we're getting close. Okay, what's the takeaway? Greenbelt, smart growth, new urbanism. So again, being intentional in making our cities sustainable. Obviously, the concern, these initiatives cost money, so making sure that they can be done affordably. Loss of diversity. So when we gentrify, which we're going to talk about in a minute, typically that pushes out people who are not upper middle class white folk for the most part. And then the strain on the infrastructure. So obviously, the existing infrastructure, the strains on that, and then how do we improve that? Okay, this is wild to me. So price of homes, cities with the most expensive average home price. So these average home prices are in every, it's $1,000 as of 2020. So check this out. Hong Kong, look at this. I don't even know how to convert that, but that's a lot. Okay. I mean, you get down to, it's insane how much, and this is average home price. This is not, the wealthy end house, but obviously this expense has driven out most people who cannot afford this. Okay, spatial distribution. How do people move around and transform areas while making them desirable? So again, this just all comes back to, you've got to work with what was existing. So, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when cities were being developed, people weren't thinking ahead like this. And so now it's like, okay, how do we keep like traditional, like old school European model, but then how do we bring it up to speed? Here in North America, our cities are younger. So like, obviously we didn't start developing our cities until, several hundred years after they were developed in Europe, for example. So we've got a little bit more wiggle room, but like New York City was built to be this insane urban area. And now it's like, okay, how can we like maybe make some corrections to this? So Los Angeles over here in the bottom corner. So what's happening is they're putting in what we call smart policies. So they're limiting urban sprawl. So they're saying, we will not allow any building outside of this area. They are Sometimes they'll tear down like old dilapidated housing and replace it with like a park or an open area. But in turn, that is limiting your supply. So that makes your demand go up, which makes the prices go up. So again, it's a catch-22. I live in the Cross Creek neighborhood, and I thought it was kind of cool. One of the things that I really appreciate about our neighborhood, it's a master plan community, which you hear a lot. And if you're familiar with the Cross Creek neighborhood, basically every like 3 blocks, so where like 3 streets, they took like where 4 houses would have been on a corner, and instead of building houses, they left them as a park or an open space. And so it's nice that it's like everywhere throughout our neighborhood, they call them pocket parks, and there's just these little nice little pocket parks. There's one literally diagonal from my house. We have my kids' birthday parties there because it's just nice, and they're better at keeping the grass green in the pocket park than I am on my front yard. So that's nice. And again, it's nice to know like there's some open land instead of just house after house after house. All right, segregated cities. This shows the most segregated cities in the US. Obviously, it all comes down to money. So when people are priced out of areas, this just shows what happens. You see people pushed into neighborhoods that are more affordable, but therefore have less resources and become kind of like ghetto areas. So you guys can see this list on this map. We don't want to be on this list. All right. Commuting. When mass transportation is not available, obviously, when you have to commute, the interstates have to keep up with this. Have you guys noticed if you drive on I-25, especially from Fountain to Colorado Springs now, I believe it's on the Academy on ramp, they had to put the signal that you have to stop, and it's like every 4 seconds it'll turn green to let the new car come onto the highway, because the traffic congestion was just getting so bad. As they've added more soldiers to Fort Carson, and then Fountain has just exploded. Um, it was just getting so jammed up there that they had to address those commute issues. Okay, I lots of historical charm. I mean, this is again, this could be Fountain, honestly, knowing this picture. Cookie cutter home, and I live in one. Most of us probably do live in one who live in Fountain. We obviously see the loss of like the charm of the old school way of life, with mass produced houses, but we have to produce these houses as quickly as possible, because so many people are needing places to be. Okay, here's another practice question for you. All right. And then again, your takeaway here, criticism of urban design initiatives. So the more we try to like correct the mess of the cities and make them appealing and desirable and green, it's going to drive up housing. It's going to decrease the diversity, the strain on the infrastructure that's existing, cost of new mixed use. So again, when we start saying, well, we'll have low, medium, and high density housing in the same area, but we'll also put some businesses in there that you have to pay, that costs a lot of money. Placelessness. This is such an interesting geography concept. Place means the sense of feeling you get when you're somewhere. So like I know when I'm in New York City with my family and my friends, it's just, I can't describe it, but it's so cool. We stay up for 24 hours straight. There's just so many people to talk to and watch, and the arts and the culture. The place of New York is unlike anywhere else. What happens when we start doing these like kind of urban design and we become more suburban, places start to feel the same. Where I live in Fountain, like I said, I live near the Mesa. All of those businesses that are on the Mesa, like that emergency room, the Black Bear Diner, the Walgreens, you guys know that corner I'm talking about. My sister-in-law lives in Littleton, which is a suburb of Denver, and literally the intersection right by her house has those exact same stores. The Walgreens, it has that same ER. I mean, it's just like this is so generic feeling. America is like that though, because again, we're all about big box. We like chains. If I go to a McDonald's in Fountain, I want it to be the same as the McDonald's that I go to in Florida. Okay. And then obviously, people still really want big yards. They want to have their own single family homes. They want to have private parking areas. But that's also the stuff that's like the opposite of what's good for like sustainable practices. People might have to give those things up down the road. All right, 6.9, urban data, qualitative versus quantitative data. So remember, this is from the census. How do we basically know who lives in places and the services that need to be provided? Quantitative is going to be the number, quantity. And then qualitative is the quality, or like how do you describe the thing? Okay. So again, number versus just like description. Here's another little breakdown of it. Okay. We get quantitative data for things like the census and survey data. Oh, sorry, my finger got real big, and see, it's awkward filming in a car. And people keep walking by and looking at me, and I'm like, what? I'm talking to myself. Leave me alone. This is a really good lecture. Qualitative data, we get that from like a field study. We get that from narratives. We interview people about how do they feel about a place. How do you get that? That's how you get those data. Okay. Qualitative or quantitative data from the census provides information about like who lives there and changes in those size. Business and local governments, state and local governments, hospitals use this data to basically figure out who are they serving. Okay, so here's an example. This is the share of people living in urban areas. So this is quantitative data. So we know at one point there was 70% of people, and now it's up to over 80% live in an urban area. That's a number. And then again, you can see same thing about from the shift from rural to urban areas. Quantitative, it's a hard number. Okay, here's another one. They can look at county size and who lives where and what they're predicting the changes are going to be. Okay, qualitative data. This is more the feel. This is the touchy-feely side of it. So you get this through interviews. What are your thoughts about building a soccer stadium here? How do you feel about the city created designated bike lanes in the downtown area? What have you noticed about your neighborhood in the last 20 years? Again, people's feelings about a situation. Okay, so here's a little practice question for you. All right, we collect this data to help provide information on the changes in the areas we live, and this data helps, whoops, sorry, federal, state, and local government make these decisions. It helps them know how many kids are going to be in elementary school. Do we have enough elementary school space for them? Or, wow, our kid population is declining, but we have more high schoolers than ever. Like our little kids are declining, but we have a boom in high schoolers. District 8 obviously uses this data to predict, do we need to, when they decided to redo Fountain Middle School, that was from this data. They realized that building, its infrastructure was not keeping up with par, but it wasn't big enough to house all the kids we were going to have. The school is literally talking about this information right now because they're trying to plan how many teachers do they need at the high school next year. And what's a challenge this year is because of like COVID, are people still going to want to keep their kid in virtual academy starting next year because they're still not comfortable um, with COVID stuff, or if the students are still not able to get vaccinated at that point, is that going to impact our enrollment? So that is that data that's really important for like a school to know. Okay, 6.10 challenges of these changes. As urban populations move, obviously we have changes that happen. So we get squatter settlements. These are going to be low income homeless communities that basically squat on the land because they have nowhere else to go and it's historically where they've lived. But then all of a sudden the city comes in and is like, we want this land to build a new soccer stadium. And it creates a whole thing. Any LA Dodgers fans in the class, back when Dodger Stadium was being built, they actually ended up pushing out a bunch of it was lower income Hispanic families that had been living in that area for 2 generations at that point. And the city was like, sorry, law of eminent domain, it's our land, and pushed the people out and built Dodger Stadium on top of the land. And it created this whole thing. Economic and social challenges in urban areas can include inclusionary zoning and local food movements. So again, one of the positive responses to these changes is, okay, well, let's let food trucks come. Let's let, where it used to only be like high income housing, we're going to allow some lower income housing to be mixed in as well. And then the function and fragmentation of governments. I know it's hard to see here, but basically, is the government even able to like care for all the people under its geographic zone? Is there too many different like agencies trying to operate, or is there not enough agencies? So how does the government respond to the needs of its people? All right, you guys have seen these words in your dictionary. So blockbusting is when one ethnic group is convinced to sell their homes at a low price once they hear another group is moving into the neighborhood. Gross, kind of like gerrymandering in a way. Redlining, banks refuse loans to those who want to purchase homes in certain urban areas. So you could go into a bank, apply for a loan because you want to buy a house, and they'll redline you. And they'll say, we can't actually loan you that money. But guess what? The next person comes in, they'll give them the loan for that. Definitely based in race, ethnicity, religious practices. Okay. Historic real estate prices help to create two major things that we still see in cities today: white flight. So after World War II, when suburbs became a thing, white people had more income than they had ever had before, right? So it was typically the men who had served in the war came home. They were back, at home in their job. The wives went back to their whole job as like a housewife, and they moved out of the cities and they moved into these new suburbs. Widefield was a boomburg, is what they called it. It was such a booming suburb in the 1950s. In fact, Widefield High School was designed as a bomb shelter because it was built at the height of the Cold War in the 60s. So it's a cool history of that area there. But guess what? It was mostly white people who moved there, and it left disenfranchised Black, Asian, Hispanic living in the inner cities, which ended up creating ghettos. And again, we still see these areas today in the inner city areas. All right. So again, redlining. So it makes, again, when somebody is denied a loan to live in a certain part. And so again, I encourage you guys to pause and just kind of read through here and you can see what's going on here. Oops. It's a YouTube video. So you should click it and watch it. Okay. San Francisco's history of redlining. And again, you guys can go through here and kind of just see how this city has been just divided up. And it was very deliberate. This was not accidental. It was like they knew what they were doing by keeping out certain groups of people. Okay. Um, Segregated cities. We talked about this in a couple of standards ago. And it shouldn't surprise you that these same segregated cities have a significant history with redlining. That's how they become segregated. Okay. Food deserts, one of my favorite concepts. I don't like food deserts. That's like being like, oh my God, I love the Holocaust. No, I don't, but I like learning about them and I just think they're fascinating. So remember, this is from our ag unit. We barely touched on this. A food desert is a place that the United States Department of Agriculture has realized that they have very limited access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So it's either that there's no store available that serves those things, or that the closest store is far enough away, but the majority of the people, they don't have transportation to get there. So they rely on public transportation that might be way too expensive, or it doesn't even get them close to the store anyway. So this doesn't mean people are starving. It just means the food they have access to is not good. Fountain is a food desert. And that's why I'm so frustrated, because they were supposed to build a grocery store down in Old Town Fountain off of 8587. And that would have addressed the need for a grocery store there, because that whole southern area of Fountain, like around the high school, um, if there's a significant low income population, if they don't have a car, getting to the Safeway on the Mesa is really hard to do. So they're often stuck with shopping at the Loaf and Jug, or now at that Dollar General. There's not fresh fruits and vegetables in the Dollar General, but there's food. So they're not starving, but it's just not good, healthy food. Okay. You guys can see food deserts here in the United States. Population is greater than 1 mile away from food and no vehicle access. So again, this is a development thing. Lower income people typically have less access to transportation, therefore are the ones that are locked out of having access to fresh fruits and vegetables. If you overlaid this map, in fact, we've done an activity like this before. I've given a food desert map, and then I'm like, okay, overlay, get another piece of data, look for high school dropouts, look for racial breakdown, look for who voted Republican and who voted Democrat. And it's really interesting. You often see direct correlations between this data and where the food deserts are. Okay. Again, they're not starving. They have access to fast food. They have access to junk food, but it's not good food. And think about the issues that creates. I grow up on a diet of just fast food and pre-packaged processed food. I probably will have diabetes or other health problems later, which causes a whole nother issue. But if we could just start now with earlier, healthier access to food, we could prevent a lot of those health problems later in the future. Okay. Again, where food deserts are, crime rates typically tend to be higher as well. And again, there's a direct correlation between income level, economic development, food deserts, etc. Okay. Schools, obviously same inequality pattern of schools, where there's like a high level of segregation, again, based on redlining, where there'd be a high level of food deserts. Typically you see higher, like more crowded schools, you see lower performing schools, you see schools with higher graduation rates or higher graduation dropouts. So again, direct correlation between all this data. Okay. And then affordability, debt to income ratio, and house prices in the United States. So debt to income basically means how much debt do I have versus the income, the ratio. And then obviously how that affects my ability to buy a house, or even be able to affordably rent a house. Okay. How do we make things affordable? Housing policies must ensure people can move into neighborhoods that provide better services for their families. Again, right now, people are priced out of the better schools because they can't afford a home in that nicer area, or they can't afford to commute in because they don't have a vehicle. So again, you guys can see the connection with the way this goes down. Okay, practice question for you there. Okay, takeaway: blockbusting, redlining, white flight, ghettos. All things that are happening in cities and that are becoming direct effects of those. And the modern effects today: increased segregation, decreased access to resources, and the affordability housing has gone down. Okay. Gentrification concept here. renewal or rebuilding of a lower income neighborhood into an upper middle class neighborhood. Why do people do this? It's an investment opportunity for a flipper, architectural or aesthetic value. It just makes the place look nicer. Connection to cultural centers, proximity to transportation line, proximity to a growth pole. That's one of your vocab words. Um, but unfortunately, at the cost of gentrification, lower income families are priced out of those neighborhoods. So these industrial areas are being turned over by investors and they've become trendy, but they're also incredibly expensive. So, like this old dilapidated warehouse that nobody wanted before, and there might have been like low income housing around it, all of a sudden gets converted into these bougie lofts. But now the low income families that were living in that neighborhood, they can't afford this now either. So, like, it's just creating issues. There are positives behind it because it does allow for improvement, which, again, you take something like this and you turn it into something like this. It gives better curb appeal. It attracts more people to the neighborhood. Um, it is maybe declining the crime rate. It's giving more development opportunities. So it's a double edged sword for sure. Okay. Um, Gentrification is not a uniquely American thing. We're starting to see this in European cities as well. So you have like traditional building here in Berlin, and then you have like an ultra modern redone building there. Okay. Poland, again, I mean, you can see, I mean, this is like really interesting. This is like clearly two different buildings. Okay. Oops. So again, lots of stuff going on here. Okay. Walkability, making places more walkable. Okay. The Pearl District in San Antonio, this is like trendy shops and restaurants. Downtown Denver, lower downtown. That was like a huge thing a few years ago. Downtown Colorado Springs is starting to see this, like with the building of the new, I think it's what Widener complex where like the Colorado Springs Switchbacks are going to play. Where like the Denver Biscuit Company is. If you're not familiar with where those are, it's like down on South Nevada. That kind of used to be a rougher part of downtown. Like it was kind of there was like biker bars there, and they've shut those biker bars down, and they've built these like the cool outdoor patio, beautiful apartments with rooftop pools. That's gentrification, y'all. It's good and bad. Okay. Affordability, again, the problem here is that this is still pricing out the most vulnerable residents who will never be able to access this. Okay. Video, you guys should definitely watch here. It's a really interesting, our boy Bernie, this is pre-Mitten Bernie, talking about what's going on with gentrification. Okay. Nice little practice question for you to practice here. Okay. And then takeaway gentrification, positives, increases property value. It's an investment opportunity. It improves infrastructure. It makes the whole neighborhood just look prettier. But the negatives, it's unbalanced development. Tenants cannot afford high rent, so often they are priced out. Displacement of groups or people. And then the people, maybe like generationally, who had been living in these lower income neighborhoods, they literally just can't. They can't pay the taxes anymore. They lose their homes. Okay, squatter settlements, a residential area that has developed without legal claims to the land. So this is what happens. We're seeing this in Colorado Springs along like Fountain Creek, where there's like the homeless camps. Rapid urbanization, demand for affordable housing, failure to enforce land use policies often results in these squatter settlements. They usually are located on the edge of the city or vacant or undesirable land, and that's exactly where like the homeless population in Colorado Springs is at right now. Okay. Rio de Janeiro, remember we looked at the Latin American city model and we talked about the squatter settlements were on the fringe of the city. These are illegal, even though these ones, for example, look like they're like permanent structures, that they actually have no legal claim to living there. And technically the government could come in and displace them. All right. And then in like Venezuela, for example, we see these areas called barrios or ranchos. This is, again, look at these. It's amazing just the amount of people who are living there and the amount of effort that's obviously been put into establishing a living area for them. But obviously, there's other issues. There's no infrastructure here. There's no sewage lines. There's no former schools. So, I mean, you are formal school settings. So you guys can see again, this people need a place to live, and they've clearly been priced out of the nicer areas around them, but it's also creating some other issues as well. Okay. Another example here in the Philippines, this is a squatter settlement along the river, and you can just see the pollution and other issues that this is presenting. Okay. All right, and then just again, another example here in Turkey, and you can see here in the caption that there was a bunch of vacant housing that has now been inhabited by like an immigrant surge. So a lot of the people that were fleeing Syria, for example, they made their way to Turkey, and they're just finding like old, dilapidated housing. And again, the safety issues that come with this, that there's not plumbing, there's not electricity. I mean, you can see how this is going to become an issue. Okay. Mumbai, India. I mean, oh, if you've ever seen the movie Slumdog Millionaire, it really does a good job of kind of showing the slums. And again, you can see just the amount of trash and just there's not jobs available for people. I mean, it's just, and again, the take home here is that these squatter settlements are home to millions of people, but they're there without government authorization, and therefore they're without any government support. The government's never going to come in and support and help clean it up or give them clean water or anything like that. Okay. Again, informal economy, love that. So you can see here, right along here, people set up like street vendor shop in these informal settlements. Okay, another image there. So people are making it work. Check out what these homes are made of. I mean, this is sheet metal with tarp. I mean, it's just, again. So the question, think about this. Like we should be providing for people. Should we be providing for people? I suppose is the question. And how do we ethically remove people from a community that has developed that is maybe dangerous? But how do you actually, like, instead of just removing them, how do you maybe remove them to a place that's going to give them better access to services? Big questions. Multiple choice question for you here. Pause and try to go over that. And then challenges of the squatter settlements. Politically, the government owns the land, but there's no infrastructure. So is it their job to provide infrastructure? The level of crime that happens in these areas. Environmentally, the pollution, the soil erosion, and then the infrastructure, medical care. And again, you can go back to crime on that one as well. That happens in these areas. Okay, last standard. I'm going to fly because my mom is coming out of surgery. Yay! All right, effectiveness of different attempts to address the sustainability challenges. So we know we have got to improve our cities so they can last well beyond our time. But obviously, there's going to be some challenges to this as well. Okay. How do we deal with suburban sprawl? So the amount of houses that have spread out, and keeping access to improved sanitation, climate change, air and water quality, large ecological footprint of cities, and then the use of energy. Okay. Regional planning efforts, remediation and redevelopment of brownfields. So remember, that would have been where like a factory had closed, and then they obviously the land may have become like polluted. So it's like, how do they clean that up so we can like reuse that land? Reestablishment of urban growth boundaries. Where do you put a line that says we're not going to build past this point? People will have to just move elsewhere if that's the case. And then how do we protect our farmland? Because we know we need those farms to keep feeding us. So how do we balance these issues? Okay. Endless commute in an urban area. So again, how do we address this? Improving public transportation and getting Americans' reliance on cars down. Okay. Gosh, air quality and pollution. China is having major issues with this right now. But how do you also keep up with the demands of the people without creating these major like toxic areas? Okay. Clean water and sanitation. We know water is a very finite and valuable resource, but it's a problem when it's becoming polluted because of people. Brownfields, there's a major brownfield in Denver. It's the Gates Rubber Factory. But I've seen that they have they're like talking about converting it to like an open park area, even putting some apartments. But the problem is the soil and the water in that area are still not like great. So how do you redevelop them safely? Okay. This is so cool. This was an abandoned railway, and then they actually turned it into an urban park area in New York City. So that's really, really cool. Okay. Farmland protection. We have to protect the farmland. So look at this. These houses were built literally right up to the edge of a farm. And I'm sure people are eyeing this farmland going, I could build a real nice house there. But yeah, guess what? What are you going to eat in your big old nice house when that farmland is taken? So how do we mediate that? Okay, got to have an urban growth boundary. So obviously, like Miami-Dade County, Florida, they literally had to put a line and said we cannot develop past this line because it was starting to infringe on the Everglades and Everglades National Park, which is protected land. Colorado, the majority of land in Colorado is federally protected national forest land. Um, and so that's why the urban sprawl on the Front Range is so kind of out of control right now because we know we can't build up into the mountains. So trying to, they're just concentrating all of the growth under in like this one like strip along the Front Range, which has become we've seen the issues. Okay. Obviously, the idea behind an urban growth boundary is to protect wildlife and biodiversity and just to keep the open space. So here's a little practice question for you. Okay, what are the challenges and takeaway? Urban areas face unique economic, political, cultural, and environmental issues. They're obviously trying to deal with suburban sprawl, sanitation, climate change, water quality, ecological footprints. How do you do this without upsetting the people who currently live there, but also keeping an eye on the future sustainability of these things? How do we address brownfields, urban growth boundaries, et cetera? Oops. And that's it. Guys, you're amazing. Love you. Thanks for hanging there with me. And I will we'll be back soon.